Hello, welcome. It's the fifth Sunday of Trinity, and our Gospel reading for today is from Mark chapter 5. It's the passage where Jesus encounters a dead girl and raises her to life, and a sick woman and heals her. When Jesus had again crossed over by a boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round him while he was by the lake. And then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hand on her, so she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who'd done it. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher any more?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He didn't let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly, and he went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. And he put them all out. And he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in to where the child was. And he took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. Just before these two healings, Jesus has been on the other side of the lake, and there he's encountered the man who called himself Legion, who was infested with either multiple personality disorder, or else a legion of devils, or both. In these astonishing miracles of healing, Mark is telling us that two things. He's telling us, first of all, that Jesus heals people from their suffering, mental, physical, and mortal. And of course that's wonderful. One of the questions we always have to ask is, how does this event in the Gospels touch me in my life? Am I suffering from internal bleeding? Will he heal me? Is my daughter dying? Will he raise her? And sometimes there seems a gap between the narrative of the particularities of the gospel and our own lives. And so it helps us to understand that when Jesus comes against the man infested by demons, and when he is begged by the leader of the synagogue to come and reverse the dreadful illness that is killing his daughter, when he's touched by this woman who comes up against him in the crowd, these healings are symptoms of a far greater disorder. And whilst we may not suffer from the disorder themselves, we suffer from the greater disorder. Because, of course, our affliction by evil, our affliction by death, and our affliction in our bodies, our suffering, are all symptoms of our separation and our rebellion from God. And so as Jesus deals with these symptoms of disorder and rebellion and separation from God, he deals much more importantly with the actual issue itself, which is our gap, our rebellion, our separation. And so he will ultimately, having dealt with the symptoms, come to the cross where he will die for the sins of the whole world. And in that moment of death and subsequent resurrection, he will stretch out his hands, not in death and agony on the cross anymore, but between heaven and humanity, inviting us to be reconciled to the Father. We may not suffer from the particular diseases of the people he healed, but when we look at our soul, if we could see our souls, we would see that they have grime all over them. They are wounded, they are dysfunctional, they are dirty, they are hurt. And Jesus is much more concerned about our soul, because once we've run our race in time and space, what's left of us will be our inner person, our ultimate being. This thing we can't easily describe. We don't even see it very easily. In the same way that our consciousness can't even observe our unconsciousness, neither can it observe the soul. And yet the soul is what we all most truly are. And as our body comes and goes, it came as infants and we grow into it and it changes and decays, so our soul is changing too. And so Paul has this wonderful formula where he reminds us that as the body is slowly falling to pieces on the outside, as a symptom that we don't have life in ourselves, we've borrowed life and we're running out of it. Yet he says the soul is becoming newer and more vigorous every day. And there's one of the reasons why as Christians our emphasis is to concentrate more and more on the soul and less on the body. Indeed, sometimes our theology of suffering just stops with the body. Lord, I'm hurting. Fix me, Lord. Lord, I'm ill. Heal me, Lord. But actually a deeper understanding of the relationship of the soul and the body is that sometimes our physical diseases are symptoms which draw us into the presence of Jesus. So it was only the dying of his daughter that led Jairus to throw himself at the feet of Jesus and say, help me. It was only the experience of bleeding for 12 years, initially a dreadful experience, the loss of a whole decade of life and a perpetual uncleanness in terms of Jewish ritual law for this woman. And yet this pain was going ultimately to lead to an encounter with Jesus. It drove her, as it drove Jairus, to the feet of Jesus. And our pain should do the same. And the state of our souls should do the same. We can look at our circumstances, which are sometimes up and sometimes down, and when we find ourselves in pain, realize that it can be and should be and is an invitation to come to Jesus, to bring him our pain. And sometimes Jesus heals it. Often he doesn't. But what he wants us to do is to fall at his feet. And in falling at his feet, we invite him into our life. And we say to him, Lord, I have a deeper problem. I can't see it, but I know through my disease, my pain, my illness, my despair, my loneliness, my isolation, my unforgiveness, that my soul is not well. And we know how ill our soul is, because from time to time we discover how short we are on hope. We discover how short we are on forgiveness, how short we are on real love, the kind of love that can survive being insulted, misunderstood, put down, that kind of love. We discover how weak our soul is when it gets so easily disrupted in its journey of faith by circumstances. And so we might allow our weakness, our illness and our pain to bring us to Christ and say, Lord, my soul's in trouble. Will you please heal it? The wonderful thing about Jesus is that he's given us these means of approaching him. So we have the scriptures, and just to pick them up and to read them allows us to, like boarding a bus, to jump on board other people's experiences and to be carried into his presence by reading the scriptures. But we have the sacraments too. We have this wonderful way in which we can take Jesus into our body so that he refreshes our soul through the Eucharist. And when he said, unless you feed on my body and drink my blood, you will have no life in you, spiritual life, life of the soul. And then at the end of his life, he raises the bread of the Last Supper and said, "This is my body, this is my blood, so take it." Don't fuss about how it works. Don't argue about the mechanics. Just feed on me and take me deep into you, and then your soul will be renewed by my life. So we have these two great ways of encountering Jesus, the Gospels and the Eucharist. And we invite him in to touch us, to heal us, and to mend us. And so our journey of faith continues. Sometimes he blesses our decaying bodies. Sometimes he allows our decaying bodies to drive us ever deeper into his arms, prostrate at his feet. But the most important thing is to allow ourselves to be forgiven by him, to keep a clean slate with him of all the things that come between he and us day by day. Every day we find ourselves living apart from him, trying to live independently, getting very worked up by local circumstances in which we forget to invite him, we forget to ask for his help, we forget to pray for his transforming love in our lives and those who are annoying us or causing us difficulty or with whom we are finding things being a bit abrasive. So let us allow pain, disease, illness to drive us to his feet, and let us pick up the Gospels and allow ourselves to be drawn into the narrative of his presence, and let us rush to the Eucharist and allow ourselves to feed and drink on his presence, and let him do the work he's come to do on our souls, which is to die for us, to forgive us, and then to begin this great act of renewal, what Christians in the East called theosis, our engodding. We were made in his image, but not in his likeness, and it is his likeness that he begins to polish up as we feed on him through gospel, through sacrament. So whatever goes wrong this week, whatever you're suffering from in your body, whatever traumatizes you in world news, allow it to have the effect of throwing yourself at his feet and saying, "Come, Lord, interfere, mend, heal, and above all, as my body decays, renew my soul, so that when finally everything breaks down in this life, I am lifted up into life eternal in your company, through your blood, through your mercy, through your forgiveness, to share in your joy, to love as I am loved, to know as I am known. To him be praise and honour and glory forever and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen."